Good morning, everyone. Welcome. I'm Chris Rebelo. I am the Senior Director of Communications here at the Buck Institute. It is my extreme pleasure to welcome you to the 7th event in our Live Better Longer seminar series. So this one today, lucky you, highlights what I think is one of the most exciting developments to ever happen in the history of the Buck. Listen up. So, we have been very successful in helping worms and flies and mice live better longer. We are moving into human beings. So today we're going to talk about our clinical trials. You're going to hear about all those trials, including how you can get involved in them. A couple of quick housekeeping notes. If you haven't already done it, please put your phones on silent. And I always like to keep the fire marshal happy by pointing out the exits at the back of the room. So, I know we have a lot of repeat offenders here because we've been doing these seminar series, but do we have anybody here who's new today? Very cool, great, welcome. So, rather than me spouting off about how great our science is, we have a video that's going to give you the overview of what happens here at the Buck. Joran, go ahead and play it.
The Buck Institute is interested in understanding aging, not only to make us live longer, but to actually alleviate and suppress the development of diseases.
Chronic disease is the great health challenge of our time. Aging is the main driver of chronic disease. To eliminate chronic disease, we must harness the biology of aging so we can live healthy longer. The Buck Institute is the world's first research organization dedicated solely to the biology of aging. We work with the building blocks of biology to understand how we age.
The Buck is concentrating on really trying to go to the root of the problem, so understanding that we can sort of intervene really early.
The Buck Institute is probably the best place in the world to be working on aging because there's so many different aspects of aging that are being studied. It's key because no one lab can do it all.
Our scientific explorers are brilliant, curious, and committed.
The idea that you could actually develop drugs that slow down the aging process was really something that 20 or 30 years ago people thought this cannot be done. Not only can it be done, but we will do it.
The pieces are in place. And we are in a unique position to put them together. Our world is defined by paradigm shifts, created by scientific discoveries. The biology of aging is the next frontier.
We're working toward a world where healthcare is better. It's a world where if we can eradicate the aging component to disease, we're all going to live healthier and longer.
It's just an incredible vision that really will, surpass anything else that we've ever seen before.
We are inviting you to a future of aging without illness. It's happening today, and it's happening here. Join us.
I introduce today's speaker. I want to thank our sponsors. They are listed in the program. They make this possible. I also want to make sure you all have note cards so you can ask questions. When you have a question, raise your hand. We'll have volunteers come around and pick up those questions and bring them to me. Also, special welcome as I look at the camera to those of you who are on Zoom. You too can participate in today's event. If you have questions, please enter them in the Q&A section on Zoom, and somebody will get those questions delivered to me. So, it is now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Brianna Stubbs. She is the Director of Translational Science here at the Buck. She also runs our Clinical Research Core. I got to tell you, Brianna is a force of nature. She rode the English Channel when she was 12 years old. She represented Great Britain as an elite rower. She won 2 silver and 2 gold world championship medals. And she got those medals, some of those medals, while she was getting her PhD in metabolic biochemistry at Oxford University. Brianna does triathlons, she does Ironman competitions, and she recently took part in the 6-day Dragon's Back race, an ultra running journey down the spine of Wales. So, one final note, Brianna has a PhD, she doesn't have an MD, so nothing discussed today should be taken as medical advice. Before you make any changes in lifestyle, talk to your doctor. And also, she's not an MD, this is not a clinic. We welcome your questions, just please try to make them as general as possible so that everybody can benefit from it. Okay, Brianna, come up, let's get started. I always forget the clicker. So first of all, who here has been or is currently involved in one of our clinical trials? Thank you, thank you. I hope you're enjoying the experience. All right, good. So, let me get my notes here together. So just so you know, there's no need for you to take notes today or remember anything. What's going to happen, what's going to happen is you're going to get a follow-up email with a link to today's session and links to resources that we talk about today. So just kick back, relax, and have some good questions. So Brianna, let's just go right with the basics. So the Buck has been doing geroscience from the day one. And it seems like the clinical trials are taking that a step further, but talk about the basic hypothesis of the Buck and what you're involved in here.
So the video that you showed at the start illustrated the basic premise really beautifully, which is that we here at the Buck believe that changes that happen throughout our body at a cellular and very deep fundamental level, those changes that happen with aging are a key driver of diseases throughout the body and many different systems of the body. And that idea that aging itself drives disease, and that if we can treat aging, that we could treat multiple diseases that increase in terms of risk with aging, that theory is called the Geroscience hypothesis. So you can kind of break down that word, gero, you hear it in geriatrics and other words that sort of relate to the aging process. So the Geroscience hypothesis, and those of us that are working on it, are focused on understanding aging, developing targets that will modulate those mechanisms and processes that change with aging, and hopefully then trying them in many different diseases of aging. So rather than thinking about, let's develop a drug for heart failure and thinking about the heart or a specific receptor in the heart or channel in the heart and focusing in on that, we're taking 10 steps back from that and trying to think about the body as a whole system, understanding aging and looking at that as our target rather than a specific disease. In a way that's exciting, and in a way it's kind of challenging, because it means that picking a traditional FDA indication for a gerotherapeutic, so a drug that's going to work via the geroscience hypothesis to target aging, it's difficult. So traditional drug companies, they focus on a disease, and when you're thinking about aging, it's like we have to pick an indication that sort of fits within the FDA framework, and that's kind of challenging.
So, with the trials that you're doing here at the Buck, what would a win look like? Like, what are you hoping that are going to be the outcomes?
So, a successful gerotherapeutic or a successful intervention that targets the biology of aging, it's going to work in one of two ways that you can see here. So, we can either think about promoting resilience in a way that extends the time before we start to develop multimorbidity and syndromes of aging such as frailty, which you can see illustrated here. So how can we push out that period before we start to get sick? So that would be a successful gerotherapeutic. Thinking about it a different way, as we age and just in life in general, we have things which are big stresses. And so an example of that is surgery or infection like COVID-19. And our ability to recover from stressful situations like that is reduced as we age. So we get less and less able to bounce back and get back to that same level of function that we had before that stressful situation occurred. And so a different way of thinking about what success would look like is an intervention that allows us to be more resilient and recover our function better after like a stressful situation. So that's two ways that we look at, what a win might look like. It's not necessarily just something that sort of delays the onset. It might be something that helps us to recover faster as well.
Great. So we are not the only joint in the universe that's doing these kind of trials. There are others. Is there a sea change in the field? I mean, I've been at the Buck a long time. There was really no talk of any clinical trials. Is something changing?
For sure, and this is a few examples you can see on the screen. It's the very beginning. We're at the tip of the spear. It's not happening everywhere, but people taking this aging first approach to disease is starting to become more common. And what we're seeing is people starting to agree around not only what success looks like, what we just discussed, but also how do we tangibly measure success. Because I think if you've been to any of these talks before, you've probably heard someone say that doing a lifespan study in people is going to take a very long time and be very difficult and expensive and kind of impossible because it would take as long as we all live. And that's why animal models are so important. So what we've been thinking about a lot, those of us that do clinical work, is how can we find what's called a surrogate marker of success? Is that something that we can measure in the blood? Sometimes yes. Is it something like onset of new diseases or onset of multiple diseases at once? So we're starting to define the end goals, also these intermediate and sort of surrogate goals that let us know what success looks like early on. And as the field starts to kind of agree on that even more, we start to see trials of lifestyle interventions targeting aging, supplements targeting aging, and we're seeing more like repurposed drugs for aging. So things that are already approved out there and in use in certain diseases, people are starting to see just by virtue of the fact that they're out there in the wild that, these is, an example you can see here is the TAME trial, which is looking at the diabetes drug metformin. It's of interest for targeting aging because we see that people who go on metformin then have improved cardiovascular risk. They don't go on to have heart attacks or develop heart disease in such a high rate. So people are wondering, does that work through the biology of aging? So we're kind of having the drug companies run big natural experiments for us and highlight things that could be used, repurposed to target aging as well.
So here are the clinical trials that we're doing here at the Buck. And I want to let you all know that after this event, folks from Brianna's team are going to be out in the atrium, and they're going to be available to talk to you if you have any questions, individual questions about our trials, whether you might qualify and how you can get involved. But here they are, and you've already talked about this briefly, but once again, so some of these trials, not all of them, involve things that people swallow. So we're not testing anything, right, that's first ever been tested in humans. So what's the idea behind what things that people swallow that we test?
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point. If we were going to be, maybe in the future, or maybe the Buck in the future in partnership with a drugs company was going to be taking a new molecule that was invented here at the Buck, and for the very first time giving that to people, that requires a very specific skill set, obviously very tight safety controls, and honestly, a lot of these things are done in an inpatient setting nearby to a hospital just in case. So, we don't have the capabilities to do that right now. We're not a hospital. As you mentioned at the start, our team are mainly PhDs. We have MDs supporting us and nurses supporting us, but, we're not intended to be a health clinic or a hospital. So everything that we test is something that has a really good safety profile. Things that are either, as I mentioned, sort of like lifestyle interventions, or as you alluded to, things that you can swallow that are either already have all of the supporting safety information that means that they're on sale commercially as a supplement, or perhaps, as I mentioned, not now, but in the future, we might look at using repurposed drugs as well. So we're not intending to quite take a molecule that's made here and then take it into the clinic. It's more like taking things that are already available that, frankly, is going to be more relevant to all of you sooner, because the drug development pipeline is long and expensive and full of a lot of casualties around the side. It's not a very, very steep funnel. Not many things make it through that development cycle.
And how do clinical trials come from our research to trials? Like, how does somebody get on that list of trials?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, this is a really new thing that we're doing. Although I keep saying that, and I'm wondering what my cutoff for saying that it's not new anymore might be. So we started recruiting our first subjects in 2022, and we've had such a lot of growth that everything still feels kind of new and exciting. So it's new in the grand scheme of the Bucks existed for 25 years this year, and it's a newer venture. So what the first few trials were really what interested we have in-house already, what was going to be feasible for us to do as a very, very first study. And the first study we did was of a ketone ester, and I definitely saw a few familiar faces in the crowd, people who took part in that study, which was our very, very first study. And it was really important for our team to demonstrate to the Buck leadership and to ourselves that we could build and build the capabilities to run a clinical trial from nothing. We had just empty office space. We'd never got ethical approval. We'd never stuck a needle in anyone here on site before. So there were a lot of procedures and safety and all of that went into just running that very first trial. So it was a balance between this is a scientifically interesting question and also we need something where it's feasible for us to run it. Also, we needed the money, so I want to give a really big shout out to a single donor who believed in our team that we could create this infrastructure, Dr. Jim Johnson, and he invested in that original study and was really the seed for where we are today. So a lot of the ideas for the studies that you can see here on the screen, they come from sort of established research programs within the Buck. A couple of them are ketone studies, and that's because my PhD was looking at these things called ketones, and Dr. John Newman here has done a lot of basic science research looking at how ketone metabolism can interact with aging. So there's a few that focus on that, but very, very excitingly, as we've grown, our team's grown and our capabilities have grown, we've started to be able to collaborate with other faculty members here at the Buck. So we have studies focused on the biology of exercise and aging, and that's in collaboration with Simon Melov, who gave a seminar earlier in this series. And we also have a study in collaboration with Dr. Pankaj Kapahi, who again was another seminar speaker looking at glycation stress, so sugar-related stress and aging and hormonal health. So we're starting to spread our wings, spread our interests. It's getting more broad. It's starting to touch more of the faculty members here at Buck. For example, one of the studies, the exercise study that I just mentioned, the samples from that are going into 4 or 5 different labs at the Buck. So the services and the results and the samples that we provide, they're used throughout the Institute in very, very groundbreaking and analytical techniques. So it's kind of magic to start seeing stuff being used so widely in the Institute. So that's how we operate at the moment. I have no idea where we'll be in a couple of years' time, potentially doing a lot more diverse work than we're doing now.
I told you it was pretty exciting, really. I've been here for a long time. This is so cool. I'm having a great time covering it as a communicator. So you mentioned that the first trials involve ketone bodies. So give us a basic overview of the science behind ketone bodies.
Mm-hmm. All right, this will be like Bio 101, and there's only one chemical symbol on there, so if you don't remember your high school chemistry, then don't worry too much. So ketone bodies are the small molecule you can see up there where it says BHB under it. That's a ketone body. It's a little bit like sugar, except our body makes it from fat. When we don't eat enough carbohydrate, or when we're starving or fasting, if you want to be trendy, call it whatever you like, your body will start to break down fat. That fat goes to the liver, and the liver turns it into ketone bodies. And ketones, then they're in your blood, and they're really, really great energy source. The heart loves to burn ketone bodies, the brain loves to burn ketone bodies, and also the muscles as well to a certain extent. So it's interesting, and my PhD research actually focused on giving ketone drinks to athletes as a super fuel for soldiers and elite athletes, hoping to get out that like tiny little bit more performance. So ketones mainly function as an energy, but actually some of that work done by Dr. John Newman and Dr. Eric Verdin here at the Buck, around 10 years ago now, where they were among the first to show that ketones did other things in the body as well. So they can bind to different receptors throughout our body and affect how the cells are functioning in a way that's actually starting to look a bit more like a drug. So they're modulating processes of aging, including inflammation and oxidative stress, and those are things that drive aging throughout the body. And so when scientists observed in mice, including some work by Dr. Newman, they observed in mice that promoting the presence of ketones could be associated with not only longer lifespan, but better physical function and health span in the middle of life as well. We sort of our hypothesis at this stage, or the thing that we would like to test, is can we mimic some of those health span promoting effects just by administering ketones in ketone drinks?
So I had been under the impression that these ketone bodies, you could get them from going on a ketogenic diet, that the ketogenic diet was the key. But then when we were prepping for this, you corrected me. So what's the deal with ketone bodies and that ketogenic diet?
I asked Chris for a little opportunity to talk about this because this is like my personal pet peeve. So ketone drinks are not the ketogenic diet in the bottle. If you go on a ketogenic diet, you're reducing your dietary carbohydrate intake, and that in itself has really, really powerful effects on the body. And especially if you're interested in things like weight loss or blood sugar control, you're only going to get that subset of benefits of the ketogenic diet if you do the reduction in dietary carbohydrate intake and the reduction in sugar intake. Then downstream from that, your body will make ketones, and anything that is a good benefit of the keto diet from just having ketones, so maybe that's sustained energy, or maybe that's cognitive function or cardiac function. Some of those things we can mimic by just providing ketones without having changed in the diet. So there's a whole constellation of things that are good from just the ketogenic diet, and a whole constellation of things that are good, and all that relies on is the presence of ketones. So no matter what you say see on companies' websites, ketone drinks or ketone supplements, they're not going to replace or mimic everything that we see in the ketogenic diet.
Got it. Okay. So one of the trials we're going to talk about in just a minute involves ketones and frailty. And I wanted you to talk about the science behind that. Like what do you think might be going on if these ketones really do help folks deal with frailty?
Yeah, frailty is a really interesting constellation of changes that happens throughout the body. It's the kind of thing that when you see it, people are starting to slow down. Sometimes words are used like dwindling or increased vulnerability. But typically in the clinic, one of the things that you'd look at is how fast people can walk just a short space to get an idea of their usual walking speed. So these people are typically a little slower and weaker, but maybe not fully, dependent or not mobile, but just starting to slow down. And it's driven by changes, as I said, in multiple systems of the body. It's driven not only by changes in the muscle, but by changes in the immune system and other pieces of the system as it's working as a whole. So it's kind of complex, and that makes it a perfect target for one of those Geroscience that we're talking about. Because as I mentioned, a gerotherapeutic, it's going to hit multiple organ systems, multiple pathways, because it's acting at that very fundamental level, targeting aging. So frailty is complex. We think that the the ways that ketones are working that are most relevant to frailty include not only its role as an energy source for throughout the body, but also very specific effects that have been seen in animals with regards to protecting muscle mass, so stopping muscle breakdown, and that's muscle catabolism, and also by modulating how our immune system functions. So with aging and maybe at an increased rate in frailty, we see chronic and inappropriate activation of our immune system, and that releases a lot of chemicals that are harmful, and it sort of drives disease on faster. And ketones have been shown again in preclinical models to sort of damp down that inappropriate chronic inflammatory response. So there's a few key intersections, and they're all at this very fundamental level of aging biology and multiple mechanisms of action. So that's why we're kind of interested in taking ketones into frailty as a first look in terms of an aging indication.
So let's start talking about, so this is where it started, right? Here at the Buck. You mentioned this study. Talk about it. And also I want to give it a shout out. I know in my introduction, I said something about, we've gone beyond helping worms and flies and mice live better longer, but a shout out to basic research. We're not giving that up. And so talk about what was found in this study, which kind of started it out here at the Buck. And then we're also we're taking findings from adults back into simple animals, right?
Yeah, and I mean, that's part of that magic that I mentioned earlier about the way that we're doing clinical trials here. There's a really, inescapable conversation between the people doing the basic scientists and those of us thinking about things in a more translational and clinical angle. So it's really going in both directions, from the basic science and studies that have looked at diet and supplement interventions in animals, and then us taking that into people, and then sort of vice versa, because, people don't like to give brain biopsies, and people don't like to give up their whole heart. There are some things which are much better tested and understood in animals, so that crosstalk is really, really important. So this study was published, it must be 6 or 7 years ago at this point. So that gives you a bit of an indication of sometimes how long the lead time can be taking a discovery like this and taking it into a clinical study. But it was carried out by my mentor, Dr. John Newman, who is working alongside me to run the clinical unit here. And obviously John's an MD. He gave a seminar, I think the most recent seminar or the one before that, and he's, without his medical expertise and guidance, all of this would not have been possible as well. So big shout out to John. But as alongside being a brilliant human being and a brilliant physician, he's also a brilliant basic scientist. He ran the study where he put mice on a ketogenic diet and had a control group also not on a ketogenic diet. And throughout the lifespan of these mice, he was measuring physical function. And with mice, that looks like we make them hang from wires until they fall off, and we put them on little treadmills and make them run until they don't want to run anymore. We were doing cognitive function tests, so they put them in the middle of a little maze and see how long it takes them to find their way out. And again, all of you who participate in clinical trials, you should be glad that that's not how we test you. It's a little bit more fun than that. So the mice are being tested throughout their lifespan. They're on these two different diets, and he saw a clear divergence of the mice with the different diets. So that's sort of a really great signal of something where we can implement this in humans and then sort of start to mimic the methods and see if we see the same results.
And also this worked in aging mice, right? I mean, even so you could be older, and older mice got benefit.
Exactly, yes.
Cool. All right, let's start talking about our clinical trials. So this first one is bike. You'll notice enrollment is completed, but so this was our kickoff. This was 30 people. So what have you found out so far? What happens after enrollment is completed?
So actually, what I want to talk about a little bit. I'm going to answer your question, but I want to explain the elements of the study and what's important and generalizable to all studies as we go into aging, right? So the important things that we want to look for, and is important for anything as it moves from either animals into people or from young adult populations into older adult populations, right? Because you might be horrified or surprised at how little work is done in vulnerable populations generally. Many drugs that are approved actually have quite limited numbers of people in the older age brackets that are tested on them. Not all, but some, which is a little, eye-opening. One really good and topical example is all of the GLP-1 agonists that are helping with weight loss, and they're, the blockbuster drugs now. And there's actually not that much information about older adults, and because that class of drugs actually disproportionately causes a loss of muscle mass, that's something that could be uniquely problematic in older adults, where muscle mass is really important. It's a lot harder to build muscle mass. So this kind of thing, we can't just plop a drug or plop anything, even a supplement, in older adults and assume that it's just going to work the same as younger adults. So ketone esters have been relatively extensively studied in younger adults, but before we wanted to take them into a more vulnerable, frail population, we really wanted to address some of those fundamental stepping stone questions to make sure that we were thinking about them in the context of older adults correctly. So we did a couple of key things. Firstly, we tested the blood ketone responses in older adults, and we were able to compare that to younger adults. And one of the key results of this study was that if I give an older adult a ketone drink, they do metabolize it differently to younger adults. And so that shows us that we have to adjust our dosing strategies in a way that accounts for an individual's age. So that was a really important translational step. Older adults compared with younger adults, they often have multiple conditions that they're managing. Maybe they take multiple drugs, liver function and kidney function, places where supplements and drugs are metabolized, and even gut uptake. Those things can change with age. And so re-looking specifically at safety in an older population is also really important for all Therapeutics. And so that was a really key outcome of BIKE. And the same looking at tolerance as well. Does it cause more gastric upsets or headaches or anything like that at a higher rate than we see in younger adults? So important for the ketone ester, but important for anything moving into older adults. The couple of key things that we did that really link into our mission here at the Buck is that a lot of clinical studies don't really care about the mechanism as long as it works. Actually, you might be horrified and surprised, but I was recently looking at the FDA filing for the use of the drug rapamycin, which is approved for use as a immunosuppressant after transplantation. And any of you that follow kind of like the aging hype would know that rapamycin is a really interesting drug for extending lifespan in model organisms, and some people take it off label for aging. And so I was like, well, let's go and look in the FDA filing and the literature out there and try and see if anyone has tried to figure out the target engagement, or like what's rapamycin actually doing in the body. And I couldn't really find anything. We know it appears in the blood and it goes away, and we know that it helps with the organ rejection after transplantation, but we don't really know how it's working in the human system. And that's pretty common. So again, for BIKE and for all clinical studies that are starting to look at things from a more basic science and mechanistic perspective, it's really important to collect samples that allow us to start to look for those mechanisms of action. And so we were collecting blood samples, urine samples, stool samples, and looking specifically, and it was going to labs here at the Buck and labs globally, looking for specific things that would show that it's working from an aging perspective. And then finally, aging-specific clinical outcomes. So, when I was testing athletes, we're seeing how far they can go on a bike or a rowing machine or anything like that. But obviously, that's not the same as measuring function in older adults. So, taking things that are good ways to measure function and quality of life in older adults as well. So, it was a real lots of different diverse goals for the trial, but we were applying this basic set of principles that I think should apply to anything as it moves from younger adults into older adults, animals into older adults. There's a specific set of considerations. And so BIKE was a great success. We have 2 accepted publications, 2 more that are under review, a number of samples still being analyzed, and a lot to sort of look at from that data. So even though we finished earlier this year, it's still very much an ongoing process, but it's really provided a lot of foundational data for other studies on ketone esters, but also foundational experience for us thinking about how we would roll out aging clinical trials.
So the success of the BIKE enabled the Buck, Brianna and her team, to get $3.5 million from the federal government to take this research further. So TAKEOFF stands for Targeting Aging with a Ketone Ester for Function in Frailty. So
You'll learn all of them have got to have catchy little acronyms.
It's like, who gets paid for
We put them in
coming up with these?
ChatGPT and they come up with them for us.
Also, we mentioned frailty. I want to give a shout out. Today is National Ageism Awareness Day. Really, if you get home, look it up. I'm telling you, ageism is bad for our health. It really is, and it's more pervasive than we know. It's something that I really care about personally. One statistic that just blows me away: if you have a somewhat positive attitude about aging, you don't have to be Pollyanna, but just like, hey, aging, it's not so bad, you can add up to 7.5 years of your life. So ageism matters. So if you have any time today, go online, look up Ageism Awareness Day. All right, so that's a shout out to the Buck here, because I'm so proud that we really are targeting helping older adults, which is really, as Brianna mentioned, which is really rare. So talk about TAKEOFF.
Yeah, so TAKEOFF completely builds on everything that we learned in that very first study. So in BIKE, we found that the ketones were safe and they were well tolerated, and that was some signal and change in some of our biomarkers, and we're starting to learn how to do those functional outcomes as well. So it's great. We have healthy adults and it looks good. So now what we're able to get to that question that we really want to ask, which is, do ketones work in frailty as an example syndrome of aging? So the study will be starting quite soon. It takes a lot of work to get these things set up. It's been about a year since we were funded, and actually just a couple of days ago, this TAKEOFF is a multi-site study. So there are 2 other sites across the US who are also going to be doing the same protocol with the same intervention. And we actually just had our kickoff meeting on Monday, so people traveling in and all getting together to discuss this study. I explained why we think it works, and so this time we're looking for people who just feel like they're starting to slow down. So we'll measure your walking speed, and we're looking for people who are not really, really slow, but not coming on runs with me up mountains for the weekend, that kind of idea. So because BIKE went so well, the study will last a bit longer. It's going to last 20 weeks. People will come in firstly for a screening and consent, talk about the study and see if you're eligible. We then do a load of baseline testing. You go away and take the ketone drink every day at home, come back in at week 4 and week 12 for some intermediate check-ins, and then everything gets measured again at the end after 20 weeks. So it's a lot of the same things that we did before. We're going to be measuring physical function. So we're looking at leg press strength. We're going to be measuring cognitive function, looking at memory and problem solving and speed problem solving. And then really importantly, as I mentioned, we're collecting biospecimens that are going to be helping us understand the mechanism of action of ketones in frailty.
So what's in it for the people who come and take part in these trials?
Well, gosh, where shall I start? I don't know which is the most important thing. Obviously, you'll get a really great warm feeling inside because you're helping science. Some of the results as we go, we can give back to our participants. So we get lab results tested like you would get done through your doctor, and we can share that with you. And obviously, you have an opportunity to come to the Buck and interact with our team over several weeks. And it's been it's great to see some of the faces here. I can see you 2 over there, and there's a few people, and it feels like it's just such a pleasant interaction because you're not here for a checkup like you are with your doctor. People volunteer to be here, and everyone's got a reason, whether it's because they lost a loved one or because they're just interested. And it's been so rewarding to work with this population, and I think that our participants get a lot out of it as well. And then I think the least important incentive is we do also provide small stipends. It's obviously just meant to sort of offset travel, offset a little bit of your time, but there is a small financial compensation for people who complete the studies as well.
Great. How about STAK? That also involves ketones.
I think this might be our last of the ketone study, so we will talk about some other things in a minute.
Yeah.
But this study is looking at ketone drink metabolism and how it changes with age. We're recruiting 100 people here, and I don't know how many of you have ever been to the doctor and had an oral glucose tolerance test, but the idea is that you have a drink and then the doctor measures the level of sugar in your blood over time, and we're doing pretty much exactly that same thing, but with ketone drinks, and we're looking at young people from the age 20 all the way through to people age 70, and looking to see if there are age-specific changes that are similar to what we saw in the bike study. So I'm quite optimistic that we'll see that result replicated. Another variable which is kind of interesting in the literature is how people who have diabetes or pre-diabetes might vary in their ketone metabolism compared with people who don't have those conditions. So this work is really foundational, helping us design dosing for our other studies, and understanding, again, how does aging biology drive changes in metabolism. So we're kind of getting towards the end of that one. We're in the 70s out of 100, but it's a very, very easy study. It's just one screening visit and then one test visit where you come in and you drink the drink, we measure your blood, and then that's you done.
So an interesting side note, that this study, actually, the origin of it is from the Department of Defense, right? The military. I never thought the buck would ever be involved in something that involves the military. So what's the story behind that?
Yeah, well, gosh, I guess in 2003, the military was the very first people to fund research into ketone drinks. And they were interested, as I mentioned earlier, in understanding how they could be used as a super fuel for elite soldiers around the time of the Iraq War. And I always like to say the project that they funded, the title of the project was called Metabolic Dominance, and that's going to be the title of the film of my life when they make that. So I haven't figured out who I want to play me just yet. Maybe Julianne Moore. I don't know. We'll see. So they have a long-standing interest in ketones because of not only performance benefit, but sadly, more and more of the problems that we're seeing in health and general society are coming into the military as well, making it difficult to recruit, and then also, maybe more critically, difficult to retain really valuable senior soldiers as they start to get problems with their health and metabolism as they age. And those people are really valuable if they can keep, a 40-year-old soldier on active service for 5 more years. That adds a lot more value, to their operations. So this is one small piece of a project that is a collaboration with Ohio State. They're running a number of different things. They've got a very cool shoot simulator, and they're looking at ketones and shoot simulators. But on the flip side, they're also looking at ketones and heart function as well. So it's quite a diverse project that has multiple applications for the health in the military, veteran health, as well as active soldier health.
Okay, so we're moving on from ketones now. We're going to talk about MOVE.
Molecular optimization via exercise. So this one is the study I mentioned that's a collaboration with Simon Melov. Still very much my interest. I think you probably can tell by how Chris introduced me that I'm kind of interested in exercise, and I'm really, really hoping that the kind of insane amount of exercise that I do is going to be good for my aging. That's kind of up for debate. It might be a little bit extreme, but the hypothesis here is that exercise and lifelong exercise is good for aging. We do know that people who stay active and people who are more fit do tend to live longer and have less disease. But again, you might be surprised. Nobody has ever looked on a cellular level, on a deep cellular level, if aging is changing in the cells of these athletes compared with people who are otherwise completely healthy but don't exercise. And so for this study, we're recruiting 80 people total, and half of them will be me in 30 years' time, and half of them will be like my mum, who's slim and fit and healthy, nothing wrong with her, but she just doesn't really like exercise, and she doesn't exercise more than an hour a week. So if you're proudly sedentary and healthy, we want you as well as we want the athletes as well, because I actually would love to be wrong, and for exercise maybe not to be the panacea that it's all kind of made out to be. So we're recruiting those 40 people. We're recruiting men and women. It's a really interesting age group to recruit women because it's around about that time that Title IX came in. So I'm finding it quite interesting having conversations with these older female athletes. But What the study involves is, again, at the start of every study, we look at whether you're eligible, talk through the study, and then there's 2 testing visits where we do a bicycle test to measure fitness, we test some cognitive function elements, and then we have a second visit where we collect samples of blood and then also samples of muscle as well. We've been setting that up now, and it's just so cool to see it come out in our facility down here in the atrium, and then it goes up 4 flights of stairs, and then a week later, we've got like muscle cells in culture and muscle frozen in the freezer, and it's just, the visually so much better quality than samples that get shipped to us from elsewhere. So it's been a really transformative capability that we have here. I'm excited to see the results of that study. And I parted with a bit of my leg for science last week as well, so I'm feeling very virtuous at the moment.
So we also, Pankaj Kapahi, when we did his community seminar, we talked a little bit about this. So talk about GLIDE.
Yeah, well, this is my first study where I don't have any or a great deal of background expertise. So I'm going to beg forgiveness up front if I can't answer a detailed question about the science here, but it's been a really fabulous learning opportunity for me. And I think a really important example of how people with different skill sets and interests need to work together in order to achieve success, because Dr. Kapahi hasn't got our deep experience of running clinical trials, and we don't have his deep expertise in the biology of how glycation stress relates to aging. So this is a really nice example of how an observation in mice is leading to this clinical study. So Dr. Kapahi's lab ran a study in female mice where they removed the ovaries and then treated the mice with this mixture of supplements, where each individual of the supplements you could go buy at a regular supplement store, a health store. And this specific cocktail, which he calls Glylo, it helped with some of the hormonal markers that sort of tanked after the ovaries were removed from these mice. So that was a really interesting observation in animals. So now we're looking for women who are postmenopausal and who have a slightly high BMI to look to see whether we can replicate those hormonal benefits that we saw in mice and replicate those in women who take the same cocktail. It's just like one pill. It's not a whole handful of pills. Dr. Kapahi has mixed them all together in the right ratios, and the supplement is commercially available again. Like I said, great safety profile for all of the individual ingredients, and so we're going to be testing it, women taking it daily for 6 months.
And so the idea is that it might, when it says delay the effects of aging in women, that could be some of the side effects of menopause.
We're specifically looking at hormones, and then we're also, to speak to our interest in the basic biology of aging, are going to be looking for advanced glycation end products. So that's the sort of things that start to get created when sugar's around too much and get stuck to things in our body that it shouldn't be stuck to. So we're addressing that mechanism of action, not just our clinical outcome of interest. So we're always thinking about mechanisms, not just thinking about outcomes.
I should have mentioned this earlier, we always do full disclosure here at the Buck. So with the ketone body supplement, you and I think the Buck and Dr. John,
yeah.
You own stock in the company, right?
I have options. I mean, it's important to explain this. So whenever science is done, it results in ideas, and whenever ideas are created, the way to capture value from those ideas is to create a patent, and everyone who works at the Buck automatically assigns our patents to the Buck. So we don't own them ourselves, but it's kind of an inescapable fact of good science that patents are created, and sometimes also companies are formed. Sometimes the scientists who are involved in generating the ideas are involved in the companies, and that's really good for the scientists because they get to see their idea go out into the world, and for the company because they can benefit from the experience of the scientists as well. So in order to make sure that everything is above board and ring-fenced, a really important piece of everything that we do here where there is a conflict is a full plan that declares the conflict. It takes any of us that have a perceived conflict out of certain critical stages of the research. So we're never involved in consenting participants. We're never involved in deciding who can be in the study or not, things like that. And then, as Chris has just prompted us now, we always declare it in news releases or talks that we do. And that's just for full transparency, to know that conflicts exist and management plans exist in order to do that. But conflicts should be happening in a way because it's a sign that good science is being done, sign that science that makes a difference to the world is being done. So it's something that sometimes can feel icky, but I'm actually kind of proud that we have them and that we manage them.
Next trial, I think this is really cool, is big, the Buck Institute Geroscience Biobank.
That wasn't ChatGPT, I came up with that one. The big biobank. So this is a great one for anyone who's just interested to kind of like dip their toe in a little bit. We're going to involve just collecting blood and sometimes urine and saliva samples from people of all different ages in the community. We're not trying to become, a 1 million person biobank, but what we are trying to do is help our colleagues who are scientists here at the Buck. You, again, might be amazed to know that it's really difficult to get human blood samples up here, and also to get information that might be important about where that blood sample has come from. So scientists can buy blood from banks, but they might not know the age of the donor or the health status of the donor, sometimes not even basic information like the sex of the donor. So if you're trying to develop a new technique and say, is it sensitive enough to pick up a change in age, it's very, very difficult to do that with existing ways to get samples. And so the first aim of the biobank in its first few years is going to be to provide blood samples, saliva, that kind of thing, minimally invasive samples, along with a little bit of information about where those samples have come from, so that our scientists here can develop their techniques, get that very, very important proof of concept data that might allow them to do like what Dr. Newman and I did and go and secure that big round of NIH funding based on like having some good supportive data. So this is something that I see as like the clinical piece is a service to the community here at the Buck, and I think there's going to be a lot of great grants and results that come from it.
So people just come here and spit in a thing and give some blood.
Yeah. And then people can come back and give samples up to 3 times a year if you're interested, or it can just be a one and done. There's no obligation to continue once you've donated.
Great. So we're going back to our roster. I'm getting good questions. Some of them, for example, there is what pre-existing conditions might limit eligibility for a clinical study. So those are the kind of questions, and somebody was curious whether having GERD, heartburn, kind of digestive issues, is a deal breaker. Those are great questions for outside in the lobby, right?
The 10-second answer is every study is different. But that's a 2-second answer. Every study is different.
Okay. And
so for the biobank, we have virtually no inclusion-exclusion criteria because it doesn't really matter. Blood sample's very low risk.
So everybody can spit and everybody can give blood for that one. And when you go out in the lobby, and if you have questions, they're going to have laptops set up there. There's a form that you fill out to show interest. So how does that form work?
Yeah, so really what we need and what we're trying to build is a list of people who are not committed to being in the research, but just want to hear about opportunities in case they're interested. And so that form captures your name, contact details, but also some things that tell us if you might be eligible. So for example, your age. So I don't want to be sending a 30-year-old man information about the GLIDE trial when I need 45 to 65-year-old women. So we collect age and a couple of other key bits of information, nothing too sensitive, but just some stuff that allows us to kind of slightly target our recruitment. It's not a newsletter, we don't spam, we just have that information so that as we start recruiting, we reach out to people. One thing I would say is that we don't, if we have 100 eligible people on our list, we don't email all 100 of them at once because I can't see all 100 of you at once in the clinic. So sometimes people give us their details and then you might not hear from us for 4 months, 6 months, and that's because we're rolling out our recruitment in a way that just fits with the flow that we can have through our clinic. We as Chris said, relatively new. We have a relatively small team. It's going to be growing in the next 6 months or so, probably doubling in size in the next 6 months or so, but we can't see everyone at once. So if you don't hear from us, if you sign up, you don't hear from us, that doesn't mean that you're not eligible. It just means that we might be taking a little bit of time to get through everyone.
So somebody maybe is thinking of other relatives who might want to be involved in TAKEOFF. Where are the other 2 sites?
In Ohio, so in the Midwest, and then University of Connecticut Health on the East Coast.
Great. So I'm getting a bunch of questions about ketone bodies. So
That's good. That's a bit I can do.
good. So do exogenous ketone esters affect sleep?
Well, that's an interesting one. So we don't know for sure. There's only one study that's looked at it, and they looked at it in a context that might not be relevant to all of you here, because they looked at it in the context of super elite athletes doing a HIIT session, so very hard exercise, last thing at night. And so in that study, they found that athletes that took ketones around that workout had better sleep compared with athletes that didn't take ketones. So that's the only science that exists there right now. We are looking at it in our studies as we go forward using wrist-worn devices and then also perceived questionnaires that measure perceived sleep. But it's an area that other people, there's enough signal that people are looking into it, one positive result, and then we're continuing to look into it. So possibly.
My doctor told me that creating ketosis through the diet is hard on the kidneys.
Yeah.
Does that happen with the ketone drink that's in your, what can you say about kidneys?
There's a few, I guess, like somewhat myths around the ketogenic diet. They include effects on kidney function, effects on liver function, effects on blood lipids and heart disease risk, that might not be the case if the ketogenic diet is well balanced and not super processed and sort of done in a thoughtful way. So I think that, yeah, like if done badly, ketogenic diets might be not so good for the kidney, but that's not a common side effect. So at this point, there's a number of very big studies, very big and well-controlled studies that have looked at hundreds of people on the ketogenic diet for years at a time, and they don't consistently see effects like that. So, it's always something, it's a very profound change in the diet. And so if you don't do it with advice from a nutritionist or having gotten blood work from your doctor, you're not going to know if you're not doing it in a way that's good for your health. So, definitely just don't go and put yourself on a ketogenic diet, get some pre-diet blood work and get some advice on how to do it, because it's not always bad, but it can be bad if you do it wrong. And we don't yet see any signal that it might affect that the ketone drinks might affect the kidney. And we were obviously looking for that in our studies, and we didn't see anything that would suggest that. But obviously, we'll continue to follow it.
That's great. So back to the drugs that are so popular now for weight loss. Is anyone looking at those drugs and markers of aging? And I know you talked about muscle mass, but is there?
I haven't seen anything yet, but I would bet you, like a lot of money. Like, I'd bet you like $1,000 that someone has written a grant application or someone has written an IRB or something that I don't know about just yet. One of the directors of the National Institute of Aging has been going around pointing at GLP-1 agonists and being like, we need to do this study. So if someone's not doing it, I'd be really surprised, but the time frame on these things, they've only really just gotten popular and become available, and actually people who are on them sometimes have a hard time getting them, so it's not like they're super available right now. So, that would be challenges in running these studies, but I think it absolutely needs to be done if it's not being done already, and, maybe it would be something that we could do here in the future.
So there are a couple of questions that relate to the MOVE study. So if you are 77, but fast walking half marathons, do you qualify for any of your studies? And why was the MOVE study elite age group cut off at 80?
Yeah, that's something we might look at in the future. So, you always start a little bit conservatively, and then if you're struggling with recruitment, you can broaden things out a little bit. It was more just because we're trying to do everything very, very safely here. That's safety is our absolute number one priority, and then data quality is our number two priority. And, we're not, as I've said a few times now, we're not a hospital, and we screen people very carefully for heart function. So we look at EKGs and all of that. But, a maximal test is a stressful thing. And I'm not actually as worried about my elite athlete 80-year-olds as I am because I'm trying to age match people. So for every 85-year-old elite athlete I have to pull in an 85-year-old sedentary person and then make them exercise as hard as possible. And it's, I know my call-out time is 5 minutes from the hospital just down the road, but I really don't want to have to be using my advanced clinical life support training. It's kind of a fun day, but not fun if it happens in real life. So, it's really just out of an abundance of caution, and for making sure that we can administer the tests safely.
So we're coming to a bit of an end here. Is there anything that we haven't talked about today that you really want folks who might be interested to know?
I'll happily take another question, but I would like to briefly say thank you to all of you who have participated. Thank you to all of you who signed up today. And, thank you to everyone who tells a friend about us, because, one of the biggest challenges that I see for us going forwards is recruitment. The first, 30 that we had over 300 people interested in our first 30-person study, but obviously not all of those are eligible. And, finding people who are generous enough with their time and dedicated enough to come up here and be prodded and poked and put through their paces by myself and my team, that's not easy to do. So that's one of our biggest challenges, and anything that you all do to help us is very, very important in us answering these questions and contributing to the movement of more aging-focused, basic science adjacent research that's ultimately going to quickly take things, demystify like the label that you see on that supplement maybe, or give you real confidence that that fad diet is or is not something that's worth trying. So every person is like the star of the show when they come in, and we really appreciate every contribution that you all make.
Watch this space. So there, Brianna had hinted that the clinical research core may be doubling. We expect to make a very big announcement in the near future that will impact that core. We can't talk about it today.
We're devastated that we can't talk about it. We're like days away.
Yes. So keep an eye on our website. That we'll have an announcement on it, and we'll also be updating our clinical research page on our website with very exciting opportunities for folks to get involved. So thank you, Brianna.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah. So I really do encourage you to become a donor. Here's a photo of Dr. Jim Johnson, who Brianna mentioned. Without him, Bike wouldn't have happened.
And I'd just still be working in business development.
Yeah. So, and also I want to shout out the Buck has...
I do love working in business development, if you guys are watching.
Also, we have a very popular donor group here called the Impact Circle, and there you go. We have fans here. So they also contributed to the bike study to get it up and running. And
a donor contributed to Dr. Kapahi's Glylo study as well. So it unlocks a lot of doors for us to then secure the bigger grant funding, and bike leading to the TAKEOFF $3 million worth of funding is a really great example of that.
So the takeaway here is when you give money, it makes a difference. It really makes a difference. So next community seminar, I will be back here on November 6th. We're going to talk about brain aging, and I'll be in conversation with Dr. Ashley Webb. So if you want to learn more about the overall aging process, we have options for you. We have a great lifelong learning course online about the biology of aging. It gets great reviews. We also have a podcast. We're not getting any younger yet. And perhaps at some point we'll be able to change the title of that podcast. It's also getting awards. If you're new to the Buck, or if you haven't taken a tour in a while, please come on a tour. We do them twice a week. We do them on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. We have, in the last year, we've unveiled a museum exhibit that sort of gives the history of the Buck and also talks about the history of research on aging. So come on a tour. And also keep up with the Buck. Follow us on social media, sign up for our newsletter. You can stay in touch and learn about what we do. So thank you so much for being here. I will be back in November, and I hope you join me as well. So have a good day. People.